Thanks for that introduction, Leah. Today I'm coming to you from Rossville, Indiana. I'm at the main shop location for Moeller Farms, which is one of our cooperators that works with us, uses a lot of the AgXplore products. As you can see today, we're not planting. It's been a little bit too wet so far this April, but as soon as it gets dried off, we're going to be putting some serious hours on this planter tractor behind us. Like Leah said, today we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the 5 phases of crop production. So I'm going to set the stage and talk to you about what we consider those 5 phases and the things that are important to understand about those 5 phases. And then I'm going to send you out to Florida and then on to back into Indiana with some of our sales reps from around the country. So to start with is 5 phases of crop production. When I think about those 5 phases, I think about our production efforts and what we do in agriculture and understanding that we've got such a huge investment into this crop. And I love to give presentations around the country from coast to coast, north to south. I love asking this question. When does next year's crop start? Right? And I get a lot of guesses that happen. To me and to AgXplore, we contend that the next year's crop starts when the combine leaves the field, right? Or when that harvester leaves the field. So when you think about it, for those of you that have corn, if you're out there shelling corn and you're sitting there running that combine and you got it on auto steer and you're done looking at YouTube, right? You're sitting there thinking about everything that you need to do this farm next before you stake a seed in the ground. And that's a phase that we call the foundation phase. And that is the combine to planter phase. And that is everything from working ground to residue management to fertilizer recommendations to all that plow down that we put on. So everything that we do from the moment you leave that field with that combine to when you come back in it with a planter tractor like this one. Right? So we call that our foundation phase. From there, we go into the establishment phase. And this is where we're in that transition phase today, especially where I'm at in northern Indiana. We're coming out of that foundation phase, getting ready to stick a seed in the ground and go into this next phase, this establishment phase. The establishment phase is such an important phase. This is where we start working with the actual crop, right? When you think about planting, we want to make sure that every seed germinates evenly, right? I've never met a farmer. For those farmers that are watching out there, I've never met one of you guys that loves to wake up in the morning, grab a cup of coffee, look out your kitchen window, and then see half the field come up one day. And then you have to wait for 3 days later until the other half comes up, right? Especially when you plant it on the same day. What's even worse than that, guys, if you go out and plant and you've got a seed that comes up, a plant that comes up one day, and the one beside it comes up 3 days later, that's even worse. Because this one beside it, what's this one called? Right? I know some of you said, hey, it's a weed. Right? That's the last thing we want to see. If we get this wrong and this one comes up 3 days later, it's going to do nothing more than to compete against nutrients and moisture with that water, essential water that this crop needs, right, to be able to produce. And it's just going to be a weed. So that part on emergence, we're going to talk to you about some things some technologies that we have of getting that crop up and getting it going, from biostimulants to some of those early season PGRs that we have in a portfolio, and the technologies that we have that are in the industry that help set the stage and help us have a successful start to a great year. So that's the establishment phase. After that, we move into my favorite phase, and it's called the architecture phase. Most of us and most of the industry call it the vegetative stage. I think that's way too generic, right? So when I think about a plant is a structure, and all of its parts have a function. If I asked you guys, what is a leaf? Most of you are going to spit out that it's a solar panel, and you'd be right? It is a solar panel. It's a panel that collects that sunlight, turns it into acetate, which is the plant's natural energy molecule, and that's what helps that factory progress and work. But it's so much more than just a solar panel. So I want you to think about it like a fuel tank. For you farmers that are watching, right? I'm going to ask you a question. Do you just have a 100-gallon diesel fuel tank on your farm? I bet some of you are laughing, right? Because none of you have just a 100-gallon diesel fuel tank on your farm. And the reason you don't is because you need that fuel when it's go time. Right? Think about when it's planting season, right? If this planter tractor had to stop and wait for the local fuel delivery to drop 100 gallons at a time, it'd be sitting and waiting quite a bit if every farmer did that. Think about when it's harvest season and you got combines, tractors with catch carts, you've got semis running. You need fuel when it's go time. Plants are no different. During the architecture stage, you want to build a great big fuel tank to be able to hold and store nutrients and energy right? So that way when it gets into the next phase, which is reproduction, and it has that in there to be able, the nutrients and energy in there to help reproduce itself, right? And produce an output, and produce a yield, produce a seed, right? So start thinking about them as a solar panel. These are also more than just a solar panel and a fuel tank. They're also a canopy. We think about this with soybeans a lot. A lot of guys say, I want to get these soybeans to canopy as quickly as I possibly can. And why is that? Well, we want to do that so we can shade the ground to help maybe with some weed control. You know, when we also canopy, we also can help control that soil temperature, right? Keep the sun from baking that soil and keep it from drying it out. What's the value in being able to keep that soil temperature lower and then also retain some moisture in those upper inches of that soil surface? Like, there's a lot of value to it. There's so much value in creating a great big leaf structure. But guys, when you do that, when you create a leaf structure, going back to the solar panel conversation, if you create a great big solar panel, but you don't have the right equipment inside of it to accept the sunlight, then congratulations, you just made a solar panel, a great big fat wide leaf for nothing. When you think about the nutrients that are essential to be able to collect that sunlight and physically turn it into something, it's copper, iron, manganese, zinc, molybdenum, boron. Those are the micronutrients that are essential to accept sunlight and physically turn it into acetate through that daytime photosynthetic period and the nighttime photorespiration period. So those are micronutrients that are essential for photosynthesis to occur. Now, when you look at some of the products that are in the marketplace, there's a lot of products that have a lot of these micronutrients in them. And a lot of us have been known to call them just a shotgun approach to pick up something that is deficient. As I'll tell you, in most cases, when you see a product like that, they're not built to fix deficiencies. For example, if you have one that's got those six micronutrients in it, and you have a zinc deficiency, you need a zinc product. I promise you that those packages like that aren't enough to fix a deficiency. They are products that are built to support the acceptance of sunlight and physically turn it into acetate, the energy molecule for a plant. That's what those micronutrients are essential for. So step one is to build that great big fat wide leaf, right, to make it a solar panel. And then two is give it the nutrients that it needs to be able to function and be able to physically do something with that sunlight that it collects. There's a lot of important things that happen in a architectural phase. Let's take corn, for example. That's my favorite crop. I'm from Indiana. I love corn. So when you think about corn, I want to talk to you about some things that are happening during the specific V stages. All the way through V5, a plant lives off what's called the seminal root system. You guys know that there are two root systems on a corn plant. There's a seminal root system, that one that comes out of that seedling, the little seed, right? And that's the one that's got the radicle, is the main root system that comes out of it, and it's got some supporting cast members. That system is called the seminal root system. All the way through V5, that plant lives off the nutrients and energy held in that seed, plus what it gets out of that seminal root system. At V6, it switches gears away from that seed and that seminal root system and goes to that nodal root system, or that primary root system. That's the one that creates the root ball, right? And that's when the growing point comes out of the ground. Something really important happens between V3 and V5. Right? In a corn plant, it's setting the number of kernels around. So it's determining yield early. This is important to understand, because if you're living off that little baby root system, right, you're not impacting or capturing much of that soil profile below ground. So you're limited on your access to nutrients. So when you think about the technologies that you can put either in the establishment phase or in an architecture phase to help support the uptake of nutrients, or more importantly, the utilization of nutrients inside of a plant. And once that plant takes it into that plant through a root system or from a foliar application, how does it function? How does it metabolize? There are biostimulants that are absolutely essential to make that happen, from seaweed compounds to protein hydrolysates to amino acids to sugar alcohols that help support that function of nutrients inside of plants to make them more efficient. And that way, you're getting more out of what you physically have inside that plant. That all happens during that early architecture phase, right? Wheat crops go through the same thing. Soybeans have some early season determination. You know, when you think about hitting soybeans early with some of these technologies, you can induce axillary branching. And those axillary branches are the ones that hold on to pods, those fruiting sites. So that's your opportunity to help create that yield early, right? And be able to set the stage so you have more fruiting site opportunity for late season success. So there's a lot of factors that happen in the architecture phase. We're going to get deep and we're going to get granular on that when we go through future episodes from the field, from the field. So look forward to that in the weeks coming. The next phase is what we call the reproduction phase. And this is where we go from potential to reality. So this is where we've built that plant structure, we've made it collect sunlight, we've stored up the fuel, we've created a canopy, and now we want to mobilize those nutrients in a process going source to sink. So plants do this thing when it starts recreating itself, where it's built itself up and stored in the fuel tank, and now it needs to take from that and put it into that seedling, whether it's a head of wheat, a pod of soybeans, a kernel of corn, right, or a bowl of cotton. Right? It wants to shove it into that fruiting site, and that's a process called source to sink. And that's where the reproduction phase is so important to understand what you can do to help influence and support that. So a couple things that are important in this phase. One is supporting that source to sink movement. And there are biostimulants and there are other technologies that work to support that function inside of plants to make it more efficient. Secondly, we want to do everything that we can to be able to support that retention of those fruiting sites. Let's take soybeans, for example. You've all seen this. You know what I mean by top crop, where you go out that first week in August and there's that top cluster of soybeans, and we get excited and we think, well, there's the next 5 or 6 bushel. And then from there, Mother Nature, she usually gets hot and she gets dry and it aborts those fruiting sites. And we just lost that 5 or 6 bushel. You did everything right, everything you could to retain those fruiting sites, or to build those fruiting sites, and Mother Nature just stole it from you. Now you need to retain it. There are technologies that are out there. There's some late season PGRs, from kynotin to GABA, which is gamma aminobutyric acid, to choline chloride, which is a vitamin B4 derivative, that work to support the retention of fruiting sites and also support the photosynthesis and the source to sink movement of nutrients. Also, late season energy molecules like the sugars, right? Not just straight table sugars with just glucose. I'm talking about the multiple sugar complexes. They got dextrose, fructose, sucrose, glucose, and on down the line, all the oses that support photosynthesis. They support the mobilization of nutrients. Those are some extra add-ons that you can use during this phase to help support, build that reproduction opportunity, right? Building those fruiting sites, filling out those pods or those kernels of corn or those kernels in a head of wheat. After that, we move to our final phase. And this is the one that usually most of us, we're done farming by now because we're tired. Our spouses want us to go to the lake. We need a break. We've been in the sprayer all season long. We're just done farming. And this is the maturity phase. And I'm telling you guys, this is one that we give up on crops in certain cases a little bit too early. I'm going to use soybeans, for example. In 2019, Dr. Sean Castile from Purdue University published a paper that went somewhere along the lines of being titled, "We Give Up on Crops Too Early." He was focused on soybeans. It talked about late season opportunities we have to actually continue to drive that yield in a soybean plant. When you think about soybeans, the size of soybeans matters to yield and test weight. In order to influence the size of soybeans, you've really got to have that late season potassium. Well, knowing that most of potassium comes from the soil, and knowing that Mother Nature usually turns hot and dry, I know that I can't get that potassium that's essential to fill those pods out and create those great big beans that we like to have, those great big heavy beans that we like to have, and not just these BBs. When it turns hot and dry, you got to remember that plants drink nutrients, right? They don't eat them, they drink them. So you got to have that moisture to solubilize that potassium for the root system to be able to take it up, to be able to finish that crop off. Understanding this, if we know that we're dry, we've been dry, we're not drinking nutrients, there are things that we can do to still influence that crop and keep it trucking. That's late season potassium. Now, guys, I'll be honest with you, very opinionated when it comes to sources. And I do believe that potassium acetate by far is the most superior form of foliar potassium that you can use. Texas A&M did a study several years ago, and they showed potassium carbonates, sulfates, thiosulfates, and on down the line, every form of foliar potassium. And by far, 4.5 times more efficient was potassium acetate versus any form of foliar potassium in the market, bar none. So if you're going to be making foliar potassium applications, potassium acetate's the source to use. Don't just stop there. Also look for products that have technology that actually support the function of potassium and what it's meant to do. When you think about late season, going source to sink, filling those pods out, making those bigger beans. I want to get it from that leaf tissue into that pod as quickly as I can. So think about technologies that support that. There are some seaweed compounds, seaweed extracts. There are some amino acids that work to support this function. Talk to your retailer, talk to your agronomist about these technologies that are out there that help support these, because you'll take and just completely change the dynamics of a foliar potassium acetate application and get so much more out of it. Back in 2020, I had a cooperator that worked with me on 500 acres. And based off of Dr. Castile's paper, we decided to change up our recommendations during reproduction and maturity. What we did is we switched from an R3 application of fungicide and insecticide and foliar potassium. We bumped that up to R2. So we did a fungicide, insecticide, we did foliar potassium, we ran a PGR package that had a combination of that kynotin, GABA, and choline chloride to be able to retain those fruiting sites and not allow Mother Nature to abort those pods. So from there, we went on and made a subsequent application at late R4.5 to R5 when those beans are fully potted and it's now just filling those pods out. We made another application and we put a sugar product that has multiple types of sugars, has technology to support the mobilization of nutrients inside of plants, and we made another potassium acetate with technology to support filling those pods out. And in that particular year, in 2020, we had 500 acres that went well over 60 pounds test weight. In many cases, we had 62-pound test weight. I'm not saying that's every single year you'll see something like that, but you will significantly change your yield and test weight if you switch that to a two-phase or two timings of application late season. These are just things that we're going to talk about and get more granular as we get into season when we talk from the field. And we have our agronomists from all over the country. So speaking of from all over the country, I'm going to switch gears and I'm going to send you to Jay Skillman down in Florida. So Jay, take it away.